Think about the best digital experiences you've had lately. Maybe it's that app you fire up every morning or a website where checking out is just, I don't know, 3 clicks and done. Effortless. Ever stop and wonder why it feels so cute, so intuitive? Almost like the interface just gets you. And then there's the flip side. We've all been there, right? Staring at some settings page for what feels like forever, just trying to change a profile picture, and you feel actual genuine frustration building up. What if I told you the difference between that smooth, easy experience and, well, total confusion isn't magic? That it actually follows predictable rules. Rules based on, believe it or not, human psychology. So today we're diving deep into the 10 essential laws of UX design. These are basically psychological principles that someone's cleverly distilled into this kind of mental toolbox that helps you understand human behavior online. Our mission here is to really unpack the key insights, look at the trade-offs, because there are always trade-offs, and see how these laws are actually used. So you can walk away kind of armed, able to spot great design and maybe even figure out what makes the frustrating stuff so frustrating.
Yeah, and what's really fascinating, I think, is getting clear on what these laws actually are. Because, they're not legal statutes, they're not hard requirements in code or anything like that. They're more like heuristics, guidelines, maybe, drawn from decades of research into how people see things, how they think, how they make decisions.
Okay, so heuristics, not strict laws.
Exactly. And the huge value in applying them is that they can massively reduce cognitive load for the user. If you design with these laws in mind, you're basically tapping into mental models people already have. You're not making them learn some totally new bespoke system from scratch. You're designing for how their brain kind of already works.
Okay, but hang on. If they're just guidelines, doesn't that make them easy to ignore? I mean, isn't design supposed to be about innovation and breaking rules sometimes?
Ah, yeah, that's the critical nuance, isn't it? Think of these 10 points more like guardrails on a highway, not a prison cell. You absolutely need judgment. Innovation does sometimes mean deviating, but the mark of a really seasoned designer, I think, is that they know why they're breaking the rule. They have a solid, probably testable reason for doing it, not just breaking convention for the sake of it,
Yeah.
arbitrarily.
Right. That makes sense. That kind of intellectual honesty, knowing the rule well enough so you can break it
Yeah.
intelligently. That sounds key. Okay, let's jump into this toolbox then. Let's start with maybe the first couple of laws. The ones about familiarity and choice seem like a good place. First up, there's this idea about the power of expectation. It's called Jacob's Law. And the core idea is pretty simple, right? Users spend most of their online time on other websites and apps, not yours. So they arrive with all these preformed expectations based on those other experiences.
Yeah, this is basically the bedrock of digital literacy. It's why we expect navigation to be at the top or maybe the side. It's why a little magnifying glass icon universally means search, or why the shopping cart often lives in the top right corner. If your product is totally new, you should probably borrow heavily from these established patterns. Think about mobile apps for a second. Almost every app, doesn't matter what it does, puts its main function controls down near the bottom, right where your thumb rests, just like Instagram does, or Facebook, or X. They learn that pattern elsewhere.
But isn't there a risk there? Like, if you stick too rigidly to convention, couldn't that stifle creativity? Especially if you're building something genuinely new and different.
Oh, absolutely. If an established convention genuinely hinders your specific use case, then yeah, you should challenge it. And this is a big but, if you decide to do something radical, like hiding the main navigation somewhere totally unexpected, you absolutely must test that decision thoroughly. You need proof that your innovative approach is worth the friction it initially causes by breaking that expectation set by Jacob's Law.
Okay, so test your deviations. Got it.
Now, moving from what people expect to how they decide. That brings us to Hick's Law. We've all felt this, right? Staring at a massive menu, just frozen, instant paralysis. Hick's Law puts a name on that. It basically says the time it takes to make a decision goes up, often dramatically, as the number and complexity of choices increase.
It's the driving force behind, well, pretty much every successful filtering system you see online. Think about big streaming platforms, Netflix, Spotify. They don't just dump their entire library of, I don't know, tens of thousands of movies or songs on you at once. That would be overwhelming. Instead, they use personalization, genre filters, playlists, all ways to narrow the field immediately, to reduce the choices you face at any given moment.
Okay, but here's the tension I see. If we simplify everything based on Hicks' law, aren't we just risking creating a really basic feature-poor product, something users might quickly outgrow? How do you balance that initial ease for someone new with the long-term power needed by, say, an advanced user? That's the classic trade-off. You're absolutely right. You can't oversimplify to the point where you remove genuinely useful features. That's a failure state. And if you hide too many options just to cut down the initial choice count, well, those features might as well not exist because nobody will find them. The typical solution is clever grouping and something called progressive disclosure. Give the user fewer choices at any one time, but make sure the full set is still accessible, often behind like an advanced settings or more options link.
Right, progressive disclosure. Reveal complexity gradually. Okay, let's shift gears a bit. Let's talk about motivation and memory. Starting with the goal gradient effect. This sounds like pure behavioral science. The idea is, as someone gets closer to finishing a task, their motivation and effort actually ramp up.
Exactly. It's your classic progress bar, but good designers use it strategically. We see this applied really well sometimes in setup wizards or profile completion flows. Maybe a tool like LinkedIn gets you to, say, 10% profile completion with just a tiny bit of effort adding your name and photo. That first seemingly large jump in progress gives you an immediate little motivational kick. It encourages you to keep going and tackle the slightly harder steps next.
Ah, I see. But the trick there, I imagine, is being honest about it. If you make the first few steps feel super easy and give big progress jumps, but then the final step takes ages, you've kind of lied to the user, haven't you?
Precisely. You must not mislead them by making progress seem faster or larger than it really is. Because when they hit that wall, the frustration from that perceived lie can actually be worse than if you'd had no progress bar at all. Integrity matters.
Okay, interesting. Now, tied very closely to how we structure information is the serial position effect. This one says people remember things best at the beginning of a list that's primacy, and at the end that's recency. The stuff crammed in the middle, that tends to get a bit fuzzy in our memory.
Right. So practically speaking, if you're designing a main navigation menu, you put the most important stuff like dashboard or home right at the top. That's primacy. And then other critical but maybe secondary actions like settings or help or log out, you stick those at the very bottom. That's recency. You're basically leveraging how human memory naturally works.
But what if I have something that's really crucial, but maybe not used every single day, like a data backup feature? If that ends up buried right in the middle of a long settings list, isn't it likely to get lost?
Yeah, that's the challenge. You have to prioritize ruthlessly and sometimes accept the limits of this effect. If you genuinely can't place an important item at the start or end of its logical group, you might need another way to make it discoverable. Maybe better search, or maybe highlighting it differently somehow. But just relying on users scrolling through a long, undifferentiated list to find something important in the middle, that's generally not a great strategy.
Okay, so prioritization is key there. Now, how do we make one specific thing really jump out? Make it unavoidable. That sounds like the von Riestorff effect, which, if I remember correctly, says that an item that looks visually different from all the similar items around it is much more likely to be noticed and remembered. The odd one out.
That's it, exactly. This is why your main call to action button, the CTA, absolutely needs to pop visually. If your whole app uses a cool blue and gray palette, maybe that confirm purchase or sign up now button should be a bright, contrasting orange or green. It uses contrast in color, maybe size, maybe even shape, to break the visual pattern and pull the user's eye straight to it.
Wait a second. So is the von Riestorff effect why almost every checkout flow online makes the final buy now button green, even if the rest of the site branding is like deep purple or something? Is the designer consciously breaking their own color scheme just to obey this law?
Very often, yes. You're prioritizing clarity and function, making sure the most critical action is unmissable over sticking rigidly to aesthetic consistency in that one specific instance. The big caveat here, though, is restraint. Like you hinted at before, if everything is highlighted, then effectively nothing is highlighted. You completely dilute the effect if you overuse contrast. It needs to be saved for the truly important stuff. And of course, always respecting accessibility standards for contrast and size.
Right, don't make everything
Right.
scream for attention. Got it.
Yeah.
Okay, shifting focus a bit now to how we visually organize complexity on the screen.
Yeah.
This gets into those Gestalt principles, right? Let's start with the law of uniform connectedness.
This one is all about creating visual associations. The idea is that elements on a page that are somehow visually linked, maybe by lines connecting them, or being the same shape, or just placed very close together, are perceived as being related instantly, even before you read any labels.
Okay, so if I have, say, 3 form fields together, first name, last name, email. I might draw a faint line box around just those 3, or maybe just group them slightly closer together than the fields below them. That visual cue alone signals these belong together as personal information.
Exactly. And the law of common region sort of builds on that. It specifically emphasizes using clear boundaries. When you see a section enclosed in a card design or maybe within a panel with a slightly different background shade, that boundary acts as a really powerful grouping cue. It helps users mentally chunk information, breaking down maybe a complex page into more digestible sections, makes it faster to scan and understand.
Makes sense. Use boxes and spacing to create logical groups.
But the trade-off is finding the right balance between clarity and clutter. If you put too many boxes, too many lines, too many panels everywhere, it can actually fragment the layout too much. It becomes visually noisy and overwhelming, defeating the purpose. You want just enough visual grouping to establish the logic, and really no more than that.
Okay, visual economy.
Yeah.
Now, speaking of managing complexity, let's think about how we handle the user's input, their side of the interaction. This takes us to being generous, right? Postel's law. It has that great mantra, be liberal in what you accept and conservative in what you send.
Yes. This is all about the designer showing empathy, being forgiving. So, if a user types in a phone number using dashes or parentheses, or maybe just spaces between the numbers, Postel's law suggests the system should ideally accept all those variations. It should be smart enough to figure it out. It silently cleans up that input behind the scenes, standardizes it for the database, but crucially, it prevents the user from hitting annoying validation errors just because they use spaces instead of dashes.
That sounds great for the user. But I can see the other side too. If we allow too much flexibility, doesn't that make the back-end code and the validation rules way more complicated? I mean, at some point, the system has to know exactly what format the data needs to be in, right?
It does, absolutely. There's a balance. Excessive flexibility definitely increases the workload for the engineers building the system. And sometimes, especially in really sensitive areas like finance or healthcare, you might need to enforce a stricter format for data integrity or regulatory reasons. You prioritize consistency there. But for most general consumer apps, the principle holds. Try to push that tolerance, that flexibility out to the user interface whenever you can. Absorb that complexity yourself.
Absorb the complexity. That leads nicely into champion of simplicity itself, Occam's razor. The simplest competing solution is usually the best one.
Right. This is the philosophical argument for constantly cleaning house in your design. Every extra feature, every button, every option adds a little bit of cognitive load, a little bit of visual clutter. If you find you have 2 different ways for a user to accomplish the exact same goal within your interface, Occam's razor suggests you should probably pick the more efficient one and get rid of the other. Good UX designers wield this like, well, a razor, constantly trimming away unnecessary complexity, fighting against feature creep, making sure the main user pathways stay as clean and streamlined as possible. But, and this is crucial, here's the rub, simplicity cannot come at the expense of necessary functionality. You can't simplify things so much that the user can no longer actually do what they came there to do. That's not simplicity, that's just failure. And this leads us directly into the next law, which is Tesler's law, sometimes called the law of conservation of complexity.
Ah, yes. The one that says you can't actually eliminate complexity entirely. You can only shift it around.
Exactly that. Every system, every task has some inherent, irreducible amount of complexity. You can't just wish it away. The designer's goal, then, isn't necessarily to make the system fundamentally simple. Sometimes it just isn't. The goal is to strategically decide where that complexity lives. Ideally, you push as much of it as possible away from the user and handle it behind the scenes. Think about your smartphone camera app. It's making incredibly complex decisions about exposure, focus, maybe image stabilization, all automatically. It absorbs that complexity, so the user just has to point and tap the screen. A very simple interface hiding a complex process.
That makes sense. The system does the heavy lifting.
But the caveat there is important too. While that automatic camera app is beautifully simple for a casual user, that same level of abstraction hiding all the controls can be incredibly frustrating for a professional photographer who needs manual control over aperture, shutter speed, ISO. Hiding complexity too much can limit advanced users. So again, you have to make a conscious decision. Who is this primarily for? Where should the complexity burden fall?
Wow, okay. That's an incredibly powerful set of tools for thinking about design. 10 laws, each with its own focus. But, knowing these laws is one thing. Actually applying them throughout a messy design lifecycle, that feels like another challenge altogether. I mean, these can't just be a checklist you tick off at the very end of a project, right? How do they actually integrate into the day-to-day process?
No, definitely not a checklist at the end. That wouldn't work. They really need to be woven in right from the beginning. Think about the typical design phases. Early on, in discovery and wireframing, you're not worried about colors or fancy fonts yet. You're focused purely on structure, flow, information architecture. This is where Jacob's Law using familiar patterns and Hick's Law managing choice overload are absolutely paramount. You're establishing the basic layout, the hierarchy. And those Gestalt grouping laws we talked about, uniform connectedness and common region, they're vital here too for defining the main structural blocks of your interface.
Okay, so early stages are about structure, familiarity, and managing choices.
Right. Then, as you move into the design and prototyping phase, you start dealing more with the visual layer, the surface. This is when von Riesdorf becomes critical for making your primary calls to action stand out. You start implementing goal gradient effects for multi-step processes, and you're constantly checking your work against Occam's razor, asking, is this the simplest way? While simultaneously figuring out how to handle the unavoidable back-end stuff using Tesler's law, pushing complexity away.
So structure laws first, then visual and interaction laws layer on top. And then I guess in the testing and iteration phase, that's where you rigorously check your assumptions, especially where you might have intentionally broken a law. You look specifically for friction points caused by maybe too much complexity or by deviating from a convention people expected.
Precisely. User testing becomes your reality check. If you chose to deviate from Jacob's Law, for example, that specific deviation needs to become a primary focus of your usability tests. Did it work? Was it worth it? Or did it just confuse people?
Okay, let's try to make this really concrete. Let's walk through that hypothetical mobile app settings page design again. We can probably see nearly all these laws working together almost harmoniously.
Mm-hmm.
So first off, we'd start with Jacob's Law. The settings screen needs to be accessed via a standard gear icon, probably. And inside, the Save or Done button needs to be in a familiar spot, like a top right or maybe fixed at the bottom. No weird surprises.
Then, to tackle Hick's Law, we absolutely do not present the user with one massive scrolling list of 50 different settings. That's a nightmare. Instead, we group them logically. Maybe notifications, account and privacy, display options, about fewer choices presented at once.
And once we have those groups, say privacy settings, we apply common region. We could use a subtle, maybe slightly rounded card design with a faint border to visually contain all the settings related to privacy. That boundary defines the group instantly, makes it scannable.
Good. Now, inside that privacy group, maybe there's a potentially dangerous action like delete account. This is where von Riesdorf comes in loud and clear. That button must stand out. Maybe it's bright red, maybe it has a different shape, maybe an alert icon next to it. Something to make the user pause and notice it immediately, preventing accidental deletion.
Right. And maybe within the display options group, the most frequently used setting is, say, the dark mode toggle. Because of the serial position effect, we'd want to place that right at the top of the display group, primacy, or maybe the very bottom, recency, not buried in the middle.
Good thinking.
Yeah.
And we'd also apply Occam's razor. Maybe there's some...
Okay, and finally, let's say the user updates their account email address in the account section. When they hit save, Tesler's law is working behind the scenes. The system handles the complex validation checking if the email format is valid, maybe if it's already in use all silently. It pushes the effort of that validation away from the user, ideally only showing an error if something is actually wrong, rather than bothering them with the process itself.
Exactly. You see how they all layer together. It's not usually just one law operating in isolation.
Yeah, that walkthrough really drives it home. Good UX design isn't about one single brilliant flash of insight. It's more like the quiet, almost invisible, symbiotic application of multiple psychological principles working together.
That's a great way to put it. They really are just simple guides, fundamentally derived from how the human brain perceives and processes information. They help us build interfaces that feel more natural, more predictable, and hopefully reduce the chances of users making frustrating errors. They're guardrails, like we said, not a prison.
So to wrap this up, we want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought, something to chew on. Take this list of 10 laws we've discussed. Goal gradient, Hick's, Jacob's, Occam's razor, all of them, and try using them as a lens for a bit. Think about an app or a website you genuinely love using, something that just feels effortless. And then think about one that consistently, well, drives you crazy, makes you want to throw your phone. Now ask yourself, which of these 10 laws is that loved app clearly mastering? Maybe it's absolutely nailing Occam's razor with its simplicity, or maybe its use of Jacob's law makes it feel instantly familiar. And conversely, which law or laws is that hated app blatantly ignoring? Is it violating Hicks' law by drowning you in choices? Is it breaking Jacob's law with some bizarre navigation scheme?
Yeah, analyzing digital success and failure through this kind of psychological lens. It's really the key, I think, to understanding why some experiences just work so effortlessly while others seem destined to crash and burn. You'll probably never look at a simple menu or a button or even a progress bar quite the same way again.
Definitely not. Go forth. Use the knowledge. Critique your own digital world.